When you look at this first slide, the title sets a big promise: how Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft Azure. But this story isn't really about Azure. It's about leadership under pressure. It's about what happens when a company that once defined an industry realizes the industry has moved on without it. And that quote you see here, the learn it all will always do better than the know it all, that wasn't a slogan, it was a warning and a blueprint. When Nadella stepped in, Microsoft wasn't failing. That's the uncomfortable part. It was profitable, powerful, and respected. But it was also drifting. And history shows us that drifting companies don't collapse overnight, they fade. This presentation is about how that fade was interrupted. Now, as we move into what we'll explore, notice the shape of the journey on this slide. We're not starting with products or cloud architecture. We're starting with why change was necessary, then how mindset unlocked strategy, and finally, what leaders, especially founders and operators, can take from this. If you want something practical to follow along with, there's a PDF linked that breaks these ideas into steps you can actually use. And if content like this helps you think more clearly about leadership and strategy, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. This third slide brings us back to 2014. Microsoft in that moment was a paradox. On one hand, Windows and Office were everywhere. On the other, the future was being built somewhere else, on AWS, on mobile platforms Microsoft didn't control, in ecosystems Microsoft didn't lead. Internally, teams competed instead of collaborated. Externally, developers felt constrained rather than supported. The company wasn't short on talent, it was short on alignment. That's why this next slide matters so much. The real problem wasn't technology. Microsoft had brilliant engineers. Azure already existed. The bottleneck was cultural. Leadership had optimized for protecting past wins instead of enabling future learning. Carol Dweck's idea from Mindset fits perfectly here. Organizations, like people, can get stuck trying to prove they're smart instead of becoming smarter. Until that shifts, no strategy sticks. Which brings us to lesson 1, building a growth mindset. Nadella didn't start with reorgs or layoffs. He started with language, with questions, with how leaders showed up in meetings. Instead of asking, who messed this up? The question became, what did we learn? That sounds small. It isn't. At scale, that single shift determines whether people hide problems or surface them early. And Azure benefited directly: faster iteration, better feedback loops, and teams willing to experiment without fear. Then came the hard commitment. Lesson 2, cloud first. Not cloud as an add-on, not cloud as an experiment, cloud as the core. This meant reallocating resources away from products that once defined Microsoft's identity. That's a painful move for any organization, but it's also where conviction shows up. Azure wasn't scaled cautiously, it was scaled deliberately, with patience. Enterprise trust, compliance, and reliability became the wedge, and slowly the numbers followed. Lesson 3 pushed even deeper into uncomfortable territory, opening the ecosystem. For decades, Microsoft was known for closed systems. Nadella reversed that posture. Embracing open source wasn't just a technical decision, it was a reputational one. The GitHub acquisition sent a clear message to developers: you're welcome here, even if you don't use Windows, even if you build on competitors' tools. Azure grew because it stopped trying to control the ecosystem and started serving it. By the time we reach lesson 4, the pattern should feel familiar. Invest early. Commit deeply. Nadella's move into AI, particularly through OpenAI, wasn't reactive. It was anticipatory. This aligns closely with ideas from The Obstacle is the Way, seeing uncertainty not as a threat but as leverage. AI wasn't positioned as a futuristic demo. It was embedded into workflows, into developer tools, into real productivity gains. And because it lived inside Azure, the platform itself became more valuable. Lesson 5 brings us back to something deceptively simple: empathy. This slide isn't about being nice, it's about being accurate. Empathy helped Microsoft understand customers better, yes, but it also helped leaders understand employees, incentives, and friction points. When people feel heard, they share information sooner. When information flows, decisions improve. Culture stopped being a drag coefficient and became propulsion. That's rare, and it's fragile. Now we shift gears. This slide asks the quiet question every viewer should be asking. What can you apply now? You don't need Microsoft's budget, but you can reward learning instead of certainty. You can make one clear strategic bet instead of 10 hedged ones. You can open your ecosystem just enough to invite collaboration instead of isolation. These are leadership behaviors, not enterprise privileges. Which sets us up for this reflection slide. Take a second with it. Where is your organization protecting certainty instead of building the capacity to learn? This applies to startups clinging to their first idea and to mature teams defending old processes. I genuinely love to hear your take here. What's one area where learning feels risky in your world? Drop a comment and share your perspective. These discussions tend to surface insights no slide ever could. And finally, the closing thought. Azure's rise wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't luck. It wasn't inevitability. It followed clarity about where the world was going, humility about what Microsoft no longer knew, and patience, the rarest ingredient in modern leadership. Nadella captured much of this in Hit Refresh, but the lesson extends beyond Microsoft. Companies don't transform because they chase trends. They transform because leaders change how decisions get made. If you want to make these ideas actionable, grab the PDF linked in the description. It's designed to help you apply this thinking step by step. Subscribe for more deep dives like this and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. The future rewards those willing to keep learning.